Hey, hello, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of getting students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials.
Hey, engagers! And today we have with us Eliza Hochman. Eliza, are you prepared to engage?
Fully prepared, yes.
Let's go. Let's do this. So, Eliza Hochman is the chief game changer and the co-founder of World of Insights, where they create engaging corporate learning games to increase the impact of learning and engagement at work. She has spent the past 20 years working with international organizations to create company-specific learning programs for its top executives. Eliza is a serial entrepreneur, a thought leader in learning innovation, and an expert in highly participative learning experiences. So, Eliza, is there anything else you would like to add to that fantastic intro that you sent us?
No, I think it covers it. So I can tell you a bit more about who I am later, but no, that covers it well.
I believe that you're also a professor at a certain business school. Is that right?
I'm not actually. So I work a lot with professors. I do teach in corporate programs, but I'm not a professor. So my profile is more that of an entrepreneur. That's why, it might be a little bit different kind of profile as your previous interviewees. But
that's actually fantastic, because we'd like to shake it up a bit and to get different perspectives from different profiles so that we can learn a lot from you. Eliza, what does a regular day in your life look like, a regular working day?
Regular working day. So as I said, I'm CEO of this startup. We're about 5 people on a continuous basis, and then we've got a larger network around us. So I would say it's a pretty standard startup kind of day. A lot around product development. So developing new games for our clients, and then business development, trying to see what kind of a strategy we want to apply, where is the business going, and then some client delivery as well. So I travel quite a lot. We've got clients basically all over Europe. And it could be that I would be working, let's say, in a business school, and there working with professors and trying to convince them to move away from kind of PowerPoint lecture presentations and more towards engagement. So I love what you say, engaging learning. So this is exactly what I'm working around. How can we create engagement? Because without engagement, there is no learning. So everything I do is around that, whether it's as CEO of the organization or working with the clients.
That sounds fantastic and exciting. I know, working as well as in a business school myself, I know it can be every once in a while a hard pill to swallow when you're talking to a professor and saying, well, this is the things that you can do. There's all these things that can happen. There's all this engagement you can get. And they say, well, I've been teaching for maybe this amount of years and I see no reason to do it different. And it's like, oh.
Yeah, that's true, especially when they get good feedback from participants. Then they don't see any reason why they would change. I also see a lot professors who do want to change, and they are completely fed up with just doing their presentations. They want to move away from the slides, etc., but they have no idea how to do that. And it seems like a huge gap between what they have in their mind of the experience they want to create for their learners and the skills or the habits that they have. So it's really working with them step by step to create these engagements, and it can take many forms. So that's really exciting. So every time I work with a professor, it can have a different outcome.
That sounds exciting. And in that same sense of working maybe with a professor or with a client, we would like for you to tell us a story. And this is not just any story. This is a story of what we like to call your favorite fail or your first attempt in learning. when creating a game or a game-like experience for, it could be professors, it could be one of your clients for learning. But that experience, of course, as usual, and these kinds of experiences lead us to massive learning or even to future success. So Eliza, can you tell us that story?
Yes, so it's one of the earlier games that we developed. It was around powerful questions, because this is something that is very dear to me, is the idea that learning is around questions. And too often we see learning as a series of answers, and answers, right or wrong answers. And especially when we work with corporates, this habit of very fast answering the right answer, this is what made them succeed and go to these high positions. And when we switch that and we say, especially in our age of uncertainty, fast change, etc., it's much more the capacity to ask questions than to give your own answer. Then how do you do that? So we created a game that was only around questions, so around leadership, around innovation, personal development. And then we wanted to create very good game mechanics. So we got in touch with a games expert, so a game designer, who came really from the game side, so not from the learning side, but really had awards in creating games. And we sat together many days, and we were thinking about, game mechanics around these powerful questions. And everything that we came with was very complex, with lots of moving parts and really great games. But then was the question, how can that be played with our audience, where they need in 1 minute to understand the rules and to be able to go into the learning experience. So it's not about learning the rules, but it's more about learning and actually doing the things. So in the end, that was very frustrating, I think, for everybody involved in this process, because we kept going back to very, very simple game mechanics of, turning a card and reading the question and then answering. And then maybe you answer in a different format. Maybe you can draw, or maybe you can, and going back to these kind of things. But we had designed a board and made all kinds of calculations as to how many squares we need to move in order to blah, blah, blah. And then we went back to those very simple. So I think my biggest learning from that is, especially when we talk about corporates, very serious people, people who, sometimes we can't even say that it's a game.
No games played over here.
No games at all. Exactly. So we have to call it a tool or gamified solution, or, we have to kind of wrap it in something else. But for this audience, the simplest game mechanics are the easiest. So now we are going around, just give people a mission, a persona, and some element of luck, and you've got basically a game that is very good in this context. Again, so when I talk about games, and the kind of games that we do is really cards and boards and non-digital games. There might be digital elements like an introduction or an animation to create the story, but the gameplay is face-to-face with cards and board. And this is also something that we have realized that people really like, having something to hold in their hands and to focus the attention to. So when you have a board, it's much easier to create dialogue, because everybody is looking at the board, and then you can take them to places where it would be quite uncomfortable for them to go if they had to look you in the eye, or if it was a different kind of setting. So we use the game to create spaces to go into deep dialogue.
Wow, that sounds very interesting, and I think there's many things to learn from such a story. But before I get into my own conclusions, I would like to know if there's anything that you would like to leave the engagers with. What's a conclusion or some key learnings that you had from that experience?
From that experience is really knowing the users, so knowing the players. What does play mean for them in that particular context? Because even if we took these same people in their personal context, they could go way further into play, but in the context where they are, where they might be playing with their boss or with the people that they manage, or what is the right level of gamification? What is the right level? And I don't like gamification. What is the right level of play? And something that can be quite safe might seem boring in another setting, but it might be exactly what these people need in that context.
Interesting. It's not only know your players, but understand where they're at, what's the context that you're finding them at, and designing for that person at that moment. And that's something key to that I'd like to bring forth engages. And the other thing that I was thinking about is the fact that you say that you don't use digital games in general, that you tend to go more for board games, for card games. And it's a key learning here. And I always like to remind the audience that the gamification, creating games and playful learning in general, it does not have to involve technology. I mean, you can do great things with technology as well, but there's also great things that you can do with a simple board game that you can even create from scratch. There's many things that you can do with physical things when creating a game, and the playful attitude can be reached in many ways. So that's something I think is very important to understand from your story.
Absolutely. And if I can go back to what you were talking about, technology, I think that cards and boards are technologies.
Oh, yeah.
It's just not digital. So, and that's also what we say, like post-its and flip charts and the way you put chairs in a room. These are all elements of technology, like social technology, etc. So I think that it's also a very narrow way of looking at technology, which limits the potential for innovation as well.
Oh, I agree. I think it's innovation. It's technology. I was just thinking of it in the context that most people understand it, but I completely agree that technology, cards, and I mean, sticky notes weren't around. If you go back 100 years, there were no sticky notes. That didn't exist. That was an innovation, and it was pretty revolutionary. Even for funny as it may sound, it was pretty revolutionary when these came up back in the day.
Yeah.
So, Eliza, giving a 180-degree spin on this story that we've been talking about, when you had a hard time with this game designer who went very deep into digital solutions, etc., I would like rather to go now into another place, a very different one. And it's when you faced a challenge that you've been proud of solving, something very big, and you say, well, this was a very interesting challenge, and we had a solution that we're very proud of. Can you tell us that story as well, Eliza?
Yes, I can. So I'd like to share with you one of the games that we created for a professor who is working in the energy sector. So that's in Europe, and there's this new legislation which is called the Winter Package, because EU is changing the regulations around energy. New players are coming in, and these old kind of incumbents have to look at everything that they have been doing. I mean, even now the anybody can produce their own energy, so the game is completely changing. And we had this, so he approached us, and the idea was, okay, how can we create a game around that, around basically an EU law around energy? And that was a big challenge. And I think we're very proud of what we created. So again, it's very simple gamification method, a board and some cards. But we worked with some researchers who helped to really go into the content, because these are legal articles that had to be in the cards. And basically, without going into the detail of the game, the outcome of it is that we have now done that. Well, he has now done that in many workshops around Europe. And every time different players who are actually coming representing the different stakeholders in the energy sector, the outcome is that it actually creates new collaboration, new ideas that are going into practice and that are actually changing the energy sector in Europe. So I'm really, really proud of that. From, how do you teach a new regulation that is basically shaking a whole industry? How do you create an engaging experience through which people can actually create new relationships that might lead to new business opportunities? And the heart of that was when he came, he said, I would like to create empathy. I would like this game to create empathy so that people who see themselves as competitors actually see that there's a new way to collaborate. And that creating empathy around, these big players, and we're talking huge corporations across Europe. So even in different countries, there are different regulations, and then this EU on top. You can imagine the mess that it could be. But through this game, it's a kind of a structured process that enables them to go deep into the possibilities. So that's one thing that I'm proud of.
Sounds very, very interesting. And I like the way that you started with that professor when he said that what he wanted to make them feel was empathy. And when you start from the place you want to arrive to, and with your very clear objectives, it's easier to build absolutely anything, whether it's gamification, learning, or otherwise. It's very important to keep your end in mind. It's very, very important not to forget about the journey, but not to forget definitely where is the destination, what is the objective. So that Absolutely. Was a fantastic story, Eliza. Is there anything you would like to leave us with? Any key learning from that? Anything perhaps new that you hadn't done previously that you enjoyed from this project?
Well, just reacting from what you just said about starting with the end in mind. So for me, developing a game is very much like developing any learning experience. So the first question that we ask is, what do you want the players or the participants to do better or differently at the end of the game? And this is a big change, because usually we ask, what do you want them to know or to learn or to understand? And we go to do. What do you want them to do, so that we develop performance, not just understanding? And especially in the corporate world, it makes a big difference. And when we work with professors, with content experts, this leap from understanding to performance, from learning to performance, it can take quite a long time. I mean, it can take 3 hours of discussion and exploration and kind of honing down to exactly what is the level of performance that you want them to have after. And it could be, empathy. I want them to have a dialogue with someone from another company, but this is really the important thing to start with. And basically the process that we use is very similar to a learning process. Yeah.
Regarding precisely that process, Eliza, what is the process, if you have some sort of standard or standard-ish process that you follow when you create these games for learning? Can you tell us at least an overview of what that process would look like?
Yes, exactly. So it's starting with that question, and as I said, this is the biggest, the longest time can be around that question. I often say, it's like giving birth; it's the head of the baby. So most of the time is around that, and then the rest of the body can go pretty fast. So starting with, what do you want them to do better or differently after the experience, and then what will enable them to do that? So that these are the learning objectives. So we follow very much a learning design approach, starting with the impact and then going, okay, if they know, if they can do that, if they can perform, then what have they learned? And that's where we use the Bloom taxonomy, that this is also something that people become very annoyed with. Oh, don't talk to me about Bloom anymore. I can't stand it. But it is still the best way that I have found to get people to formulate really good learning objectives. So once we have these, basically in a normal learning design process, the next step would be, okay, what kind of learning activities can we create to reach these learning objectives? But what we do is that we say, okay, we assume that the learning activity will be a game, and then becomes the game design. So the whole first part is very much a learning design approach, and then the game design is only at the end. Okay, if you want them to develop these skills, these habits of thought, then this is the experience that we need to create for them so that they can actually practice and reach the performance through the game.
That's fantastic. It's a very neat process, and it's very related to things that most of us might have known from before.
Yes.
Now, Eliza, we are going to move in what we call the second part of the interview, or the quick answers we get into after the stories, which are very interesting as well. And the first thing that we would like to know, Eliza, is what is something that you would consider is some sort of best practice or an element or an idea, strategy that almost any gamification or game design project for learning could benefit from?
Well, I would go back to really starting with the user. So this is a design thinking, user experience kind of approach. Who is the user? Just put yourself in the shoes and understand not only the vocabulary that they might use, but also, what might be their frustrations, who might they need to convince. So again, I'm talking about, corporate world.
In educational settings, it's exactly the same. You have the principal, you have the board, you have
Yes.
In the universities, you have the authorities, the area director, you have absolutely everything. There's always stakeholders, and
Yes.
that's the way I like to address when you have these kinds of things. I talk to them about as the stakeholders.
Yes.
But I agree it could be different.
No, absolutely. It's the same. It's the same. I mean, I think the difference that I make when I talk about corporate context is very much like the worst thing that can happen around play in a corporate context is for people to think that they are, losing their time. What are we doing? There's a lot at stake, and it has to go very fast for them to see that, yes, it is adding value. So it's always this balance between play and seriousness that has to be exactly right. And in order to hit this right balance, I mean, it can be different individually, but also depending on the context. So this is the most important aspect, I would say, when we create a game. How does this play feel like? And for that, for me, I have to always forget what I think play is, and just forget that and put myself in these people's situation, context, and start from there.
That makes a lot of sense. And again, engagers, if you are in corporate settings, that applies directly to you. If you're not, if you're an educator from school or even from a university, there's things that you have to still think about. Perhaps it's not about whether you'll get the client or not, but remember, and I'm sure you've experienced this before, is whether you have your students engaged in your class or not. And if they're not engaged, you will be enjoying the class less, for sure. They will be learning less, and the results won't be the same. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you're passionate about what you're doing and you want to make it a lot better, and what you want to make it amazing, or even more amazing than it already is. So think about these things, because they will greatly help you in your process and in your future classes. And Eliza, the next question is a bit different, and we would like to know what your favorite game is.
Yes. So favorite game at the moment, it's called Forbidden Island. It's also a kind of tabletop game, and I don't know if you know it.
Nope, I haven't heard it.
Okay, I really like it because it's a collaborative game. So you win or you lose against the game. So you basically, the island is sinking, and the players need to gather a number of treasures before the island disappears, and then we need to leave the island together. It's surprisingly difficult. We were just playing last night, and we actually, died. So the kind of, I really like this, and this is something that I try to put in a lot of our games, is this idea of collaboration, because again, we tend to look at winning and losing as the goal of the game, basically. But when we talk about serious games, you win because you learn. It's not, the play is a side product of the experience. What we want to do is create learning. So I really have seen that when players can collaborate, it has a more interesting feel. But another one that I'd like to share, because this Monopoly is one of the most famous games, is one that has really inspired me, because I think it's one of the first serious games or learning games that I have come across. And it was created in order to teach people about the dangers of monopoly, of people having too much land and the taxation, etc., around that. And that was, in early 20th century. And I think that this is why also we have gone back to, or we have focused on this non-digital aspect, because there is so much power in getting people in the same space and manipulating little objects. And so I really like this game as well. She's not collaborative, but...
Taking a side note on Monopoly, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was they were talking about, Monopoly, but they were saying that the initial objective of the game was something like a critique, a very strong critique to capitalism,
yes,
or something around those lines. And of course, it's now become actually like almost an icon of capitalism in a way.
Yes, absolutely. And this shows a really good game mechanic, which is what does the opposite of the learning look like? So we just created a game around corporate values for an organization. So instead of saying, these are our 3 values and this is the PowerPoint that goes with them, and we'll just put it on the website and forget them, they wanted to create something that engages everyone in the organization. And basically, one of the things that we put in the game is to imagine what the organization looks like without one of the values. So you take the opposite, and it's easier for people to say, without the care, for example, if one of the corporate values is about caring, what does our organization look like without care? And that's much more playful than to say, give examples of caring in our organization. So absolutely the same idea as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And is there any person, Eliza, that you would like to listen interviewed in Professor Game?
Well, I don't have a name, but I would be very interested in hearing more about corporate universities, or in that field, maybe an organization that has taken playful learning to the core of their approach to the whole curriculum. So instead of just adding a game here and adding a game here to create engagement, but mostly it's about lectures and presentations, is there an organization that has completely turned to games or to play in order to create learning? I haven't found that. So if you find that kind of person, I'd be very interested in hearing and seeing what is the impact of that on the business, on the actual organization.
Interesting. There's, I'm sure that somebody like past guests like Ann Coppens and Monica Cornetti, I don't know if you've heard of them. They are more focused on the corporate settings. They probably know of somebody like that or some situation like that one. So I'll probably get back to them and ask to see
Great.
if they have any examples. And by the way, I don't know if you know, in Chicago in October there will be a conference about the gamification of learning. It's called GamiCon in the US.
Yes, we're looking at that, and we really want to go there.
Oh,
So
I hope to meet you there. We'll
yeah,
be
that'd be
presenting
great.
in that one, and it has a related conference, which is online learning conference of the training magazine as well, which is co-located. So I'll be participating in both conferences.
Okay, well, hopefully we can meet there.
Hopefully, I'm looking forward. Eliza, is there any book that you think could serve as an inspiration or that you would recommend to the engagers, to this audience?
Well, there's one book that I can think of top of mind. It's not completely, I mean, it's not related to gaming, but it's linked to, I think I've had so many insights from reading it, and I'm sure everybody of your listeners know it. It's a Thinking Fast and Slow. And I think that it still is the book that has shaped a lot of how I have been thinking recently. Another one, because I want to give you two books, is not a recent book. It's by Peter Senge. It's called The Fifth Discipline. And it's around systems thinking, and that is the book that has had the most influence on myself. So it's about creating learning organizations, and I have arrived to games through this learning organizations. How can you create organizations that continuously learn and that put learning at the core of everything they do? And for me, learning and playing and are so close. It might, sometimes I say that, and then people are like, well, we're doctors or we are pilots, and if in our work we play too much, we put people's lives at risk. So how do you square that circle? But still, I do think that playing, learning, and working, they used to be completely different worlds, but now they are coming way closer. And so I would say this fifth discipline.
Those are great recommendations. In fact, I passed in the episode number 1 with Yukai Chao. He did like a read through of Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by, I think it's Daniel Kahneman.
Yes, yeah.
And he did a read through so that you could read alongside him. I think it's recorded, or even he has it on blog posts. I'm not certainly sure, but I know he did a read through for that as well. Very, very interesting books for sure.
Yes, yeah.
Eliza, what would you say is your superpower, your sweet spot when creating these learning games or gamification strategies?
I would say if I had an avatar, I would be the boredom smasher. So I have a kind of a sixth sense of boredom. I hate being bored, and I think that or bored is basically disengaged. In the recent study, Gallup study, it said that 85% of employees worldwide are disengaged at work. I think this is so sad if you think of the loss of innovation and well-being as well, because when you're not engaged, it can be painful. So that would be my boredom smasher. That's me.
Especially useful for these contexts as well.
Yes, yes.
So now, Eliza, we're going to go into a slightly gamified final part of the interview where we'll find a random question. It's not completely random. We get it from the audience, but I check them before, I filter them before.
Okay.
And it'll come to you so that you can give it a shot at what you think is the best answer. So here it comes. It says, I want to learn the principles of gamification, what gamification is and how to harness them in practical ways at different scales, personal, professional, interpersonal, organizational, societal, to obtain great results. So what would you say to this person?
That's an easy question. Thank you very much.
Very broad, I have to say.
Exactly. So the heart of the question, I think, is about, how can this person learn about gamification? Is
yes.
Yes,
that's what I think as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I would say the first step is to play yourself. So yourself, go and play all kinds of different games, online, with kids, with other adults, and really see how it feels to be in this engaged, playful vibe or world. I think we learn a lot from our own experience. So be as much as possible in contexts where you actually are playing. And then, there would be so much more to say, but if you can connect to what it feels like, because very often I have seen games that are actually not games. I would say they are more like activities or exercises. They are process. You need to do this and that, which can be very engaging, but it's not the game. In game, there has to be an element of freedom and an element of craziness, if you want to use that word, that is quite different and quite specific. So knowing how it feels when you are a player, where anything within the rules, you can do anything. You can kind of cheat the game as long as it's within the rules, and everything that is outside the rules is really cheating, and you're not allowed to do that. But the element of freedom that you have when you play is something quite magical. And when you know what it feels like, then you know when it doesn't feel like that, when it feels too constrained or too much like an activity or exercise.
That freedom that you were mentioning when you were talking about that, I remembered a game that I'm playing right now, a digital game, which is called Shadows of Mordor. It's based on Tolkien's adventures, but you're basically a ranger that falls into Mordor and all these things. But the interesting thing I wanted to highlight is that you have so much freedom. I mean, you literally can go anywhere, do anything you want. I mean, and you find things to interact with constantly. Even if you stop following the main story and you avoid every single main story mission, you can play there forever, and different things will be happening. And you find new captains and new people who challenge you and do new things. And it's a very open world in that sense. So it's like almost the extreme of that thing that you were mentioning of freedom, because of course it doesn't have a purpose of learning or similar, but I just wanted to bring it up as an example of a very complex game in which you have almost absolute freedom of doing anything you want.
Exactly. And for me, the biggest pleasure I can have when I see people play one of the games that we make is to see that, they start bending the rule. They start doing things that I had never imagined that they would do. And it's so much more powerful. And then very often they look at me or they look at the facilitator like, I know this is not permitted, but still I'm being cheeky. And actually it is permitted, because you are the player. You have to be playing basically, and play is also about finding your own way, and that's absolutely, the element of freedom is at the core.
Definitely. So Eliza, we're reaching the end of the interview, but so I wanted to ask you if you have any final quick piece of advice you want to leave the engagers with. Then we'll talk about how can we connect with you and World of Insights, and then we'll say it's game over.
All right. Last quick advice, just play, I would say.
Fantastic. So where can we reach you, if that's possible? We'll ask you maybe perhaps follow-up questions from this interview, somewhere, or the webpage of the company that you
Sure.
that you have, or where can we know more about World of Insights and Eliza?
Yes. So the company website is worldofinsights.co. And there you will find my contact information and a lot of the things that we do. So that's the best way to find me. Otherwise, it's Eliza at worldofinsights.co.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for your time, Eliza. I know you have a very tight schedule, and there's many things to do in the world when creating gamification and games for learning in corporate settings. But now it's time to say it's game over.
All right. Well, it was fun to play with you.
Fantastic. See you around. Hope to see you in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye-bye.
Hey Engagers, Thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. If you want more details of this interview with Eliza, then go to professorgame.com/podcast/041 for episode 41. There you can also subscribe, and that way we can be in contact. You'll have exclusive access to opportunities that we have for you. And in fact, if you're even considering going to Gamification Europe in Amsterdam this November, we have a special deal there in our email list. So go to professorgame.com/subscribe and you'll get a special link. I'll see you there.